Good morning. Good morning. It's great to see everyone and welcome everyone who is watching us online. And this morning, we have a whole group of people who are gathered actually in a real building in Leland that belongs to us. That's a long story. Not for long. It's going to come down eventually as we build something new there, but at least it's a good start. They're not like kind of running all over the place, and they're able to meet. So we're glad you guys are there and stable for now. This morning, I'm really excited about, this is part 4 of a series called Welcome Home. And it really is exploring what it means for us to be the church, for us to exist in this world as people who belong to this family of God, and what it is that He intends for us, what He wants for us, what He intends for you, and what your part in it is. Last week we talked about sort of the house rules and what we expect of one another, should expect of one another and from one another. And we also, this morning, we're going to talk about getting the house keys. And giving someone the keys to something isn't just giving them access. A lot of times if people get access to stuff, they just take advantage of it to show other people how cool they are. But Jesus gives us keys. We're going to talk about this morning. He gives us keys. And I want for us to consider the purpose for which He has handed those to us. And so we've been kind of talking about this, that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it was this place where God was with us, or He designed to be with us, that His will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. But we decided that we needed a better say. We decided we weren't sure what God was doing. And so that trust was broken, and that is what was known as the fall. Sin entered into the world. And after that, there was a separation. There was a separation between God and His people, between life and between death. And that separation is what we live in now. And so we live in this world that is separated from the rule that God intended for us to live under, the rule of His love. And what He has done is He has called us out of this world, right? He has removed us from the world, and He's forming us, redeeming us into His image. And the idea is that there's this place or this space where you and I live, and we've been talking about this for the last couple of weeks, drawing like this. There's this space, a relational space known as His body, known as His church, known as the bride of Christ. A lot of metaphors in the scriptures, and it is this place where we learn to pray, Lord, let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And it is in this place where that actually comes to be so. So it's in us. It's in His people. It's not. So what a lot of us have tried to do is to take on earth as it is in heaven and make a way to overlay it on the world so that the world will operate like the kingdom of God, and it won't, because this is something distinctly different. You and I, as followers of Jesus, as a people of God, as those who live under His rule and reign in His kingdom, are distinctly different and separate from the world. So He calls us out, and we do this by gathering together. We do this by small groups. We do this by shouldering up with one another and carrying burdens. We do this by learning together, by growing together. We do this by sometimes personally moving out of a situation, or sort of resurrendering ourselves in a moment to align ourselves and to let God sort of shape our responses and form us so that we enter back into that situation or circumstance to bring something better. That's the picture that we've sort of given. He's called us out of the world to form us. And last week, I gave you these sort of expectations, these things that I expect, that we expect for you. And I want to remind you there's a big difference between something being expected from you in order to belong, and something being expected for you because you belong. Does that make sense? A lot of churches you've grown up in, you've got to do all these things. They expect all these things in order for you to be a part. You have to check all these boxes. What we're saying is you show up here, and because you show up here and you enter in and you participate and you sort of avail yourself, we expect these things to happen. I use this acrostic, R-E-A-L, because back in the 90s, whenever you were doing stuff, you always used an acrostic and it made sense, R-E-A-L. So we'll give these to you again. We taught these in depth last week, or at least presented to you last week. But we want you to have a relationship with Christ. We want for every person, every one of you listening, to have a personal relationship with Christ, to cultivate your own personal walk with Him. That's what we want. I want that for you. I want it badly for you. The E is engage in community. I want for you to be engaged in community. I want for you to be surrounded and cared for and connected. We want for you to be vitally connected to the body of Port City Community Church. I don't want you to just go, oh, I attend there sometimes. I want there to be a vital connection from which you draw life and you also give life. A is active in service. We believe that Jesus has just given us this sign of greatness is our willingness to serve and sacrifice for one another. To be active in service is to do what needs to be done. We want for everyone to have a sense of shared responsibility for what happens in and through our church. I want for all of you to have a sense of shared responsibility. Listen, in our culture, what most people do is when they don't get what they want, they just cross their arms and go do something else. In order to make things happen, you got to be committed to things. You got to give yourself to things. We got to really sense and share responsibility for what God is doing in our church and what he's doing through our church. And that also includes paying attention to what God is doing in you. That's a part of that responsibility. And then L is to leverage your life. I love this idea because it's just taking something and there's a force added to it that causes it to be more than it could or it was. To leverage your life, we want every person to fulfill God's call on your life. I want it to be more than just what college you should go to and what career you should do, but how you avail yourself to him and find the fullness and freedom of the life that he has called you to live in. God is sending us or calling us out of the world to do those things in us. But then also, he sends us back into the world. We don't just get to escape. We have to live in this nutty place in which we live. Did y'all notice it's kind of nutty out there? He's sending us back to act on it in redemptive ways. We're a formative community. We come in here and we are shaped and changed with redemptive activity. The activity we work for is not the resolving of tensions, but the redemption of a broken world. And this happens when we enter into it with authority, with compassion, with what God has given to us, what we have received from him, namely his love. So I want to look this morning, continue to look at this passage that we looked at last week. It's in Matthew chapter 16. And before we jump in there, I want to remind you that this place we're talking about, this idea that we're using of the world, which I think is consistent in the scriptures, is the world is a system. It's a system that operates separate from life with God. So if in this space we live under God's rule and reign, out here lives separately from it. And when you live separately from God's rule, when you live separate outside of the rule of love, the only thing you have is really the rule of law. The only thing you have is the capacity to make and force systems, to make and force compliant behavior for people who are willing to cooperate together and to live under that particular system. It creates cultures, it splinters cultures with all these things. And this is rooted, I don't have time to go into this. We're going to talk more about this in a series in a couple of weeks. But this is, I think, and I don't have, again, a lot of time, I think this is governed by fear. And I think it operates sort of in this realm or these cycles of fear and of pride. The world is a system that operates separate from God, and it operates in a way that it holds everything captive that God intends to redeem. There's everything in this world that we see. Nothing is outside of God's longing to be redeemed. No person is outside of God's longing to draw them into the way he's called them to be. And so this system holds everything captive underneath it. It's an important way for us to get this in our minds. Now, what's interesting, and I want to just kind of set this up, when I think about fear and pride, these are more subtle and insidious than what we think. Most of us would not describe ourselves as being proud or prideful, but there's elements, or even fear or fearful. But there are elements in us that sort of give us clues. When I talk about pride, I'm talking about a way in which it sort of demands our way and is insanely threatened when anything violates that. When we sort of mantra ourselves on sort of being self-sufficient, not needing another person or another thing. When we pride ourselves on sort of being able to make our own way, being a self-made man or a self-made woman. These are all elements or roots of pride. Self-centeredness, self-absorption, self-sufficiency. These are all markers of how we sort of end up depending on or living in this sort of place of pride. And fear is obvious in a lot of places. There are so many people who are afraid. We're afraid of the economy. We're afraid of the political tension and turmoil. We're afraid of what's going to happen, the uncertainty that looms in front of all of us. There's sort of a pervasive fear in our culture we can all agree with. And then we have the others, sort of who they don't, well, I don't have time to get into that. But essentially what I want to make very clear is pride or fear is not just being afraid of something. The fear is also revering the wrong things. To make much of things that should not be made much of. To depend on things that cannot depend on. In this world, the only thing that we have that sort of brings the measure of stability is this rule of law. And I want to be really mindful, because what we tend to think is that as the church, if we can just get this system overlaid on this system, the world will be fine. That's not how it works. When I look around and I know there's so much madness around the government and around the laws, and whether it be the mask mandate or whether it be all the stuff that's happening in Texas, all of this stuff, and there are very strong opinions on these issues. I don't know if you're aware of that or not. People come out of their seats over this. And when I look at this, and I've been wrestling with this for a long time. I grew up sort of the Christian right? I get it all. I understand. I love the country we get to live in. I love all those things. But I look at this point in my life with the perspective that I feel like God is continuing to reveal or show or demonstrate. What I'm learning is it makes me sad. And here's what it reveals. It reveals that all these systems are insufficient for what human beings really want. It's just insufficient. It just cannot be done the way we're intended to on earth, apart from the will of God being done here just like it was intended. It just doesn't exist. This world is hopelessly separated from the rule of God's love. And he invites us in, and then he sends us out. So I want to explore this, because let me give you one more thing, this will set this up. Then we'll jump into Matthew 16. I got some time here. So the way you can sort of monitor this, and I've told you that whenever you're having conversations centered on fear and pride, you're never having redemptive conversations. And they're usually marked by hyper generalizations. They're usually marked by these sweeping statements about what will be if this happens, and it's just off the cliff and everything. It's just these sweeping generalizations about policy and statistics, and well, here's a study that says this, and here's the thing that says that. And it's almost always sort of in a general view. It's a sweeping overgeneralization, oversimplifying, reducing or removing the humanity part of it. It doesn't matter what issue you pick, but this is how people end up standing on issues rather than walking with people. Because in this moment, we sort of remove that, we make people objects, and what happens is things get very impersonal. And sort of we live in the sense of the general and the impersonal. And so I want you to just sort of file that in your brain for just a second. Now let's look at Matthew chapter 6. These cycles of fear and pride, they fuel the worst parts of humanity. And they perpetuate continued separation. If we haven't seen anything in our culture, you should at least be able to say, yep, that's what we're seeing. If you think there's any discourse that you're seeing in our culture currently that is moving towards unity and harmony and whole, I don't know where it is. It is a perpetual division and separation and removal from one another. And so enter in what God invites us into, what Jesus has actually done for us. Matthew chapter 16, this comes after the Pharisees, the religious rulers, the governing authorities of that day and age. They're coming to Jesus going, give us a sign, do something cool so we'll know who you really are. And Jesus says, I'm not giving you a sign. I love this about Jesus. He said, you already have one. I'm not giving you another one. And then he teaches his disciples, and they begin to understand that what Jesus is calling them to is something fundamentally different. And they're beginning to understand this. And then Jesus sort of takes a poll to find out what the word on the street is about. And we talked about this last week, Matthew chapter 16. He says, hey, who are people saying that I am? And some say that he's John the Baptist, and some say that he's Elijah, and others say he's Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And I mentioned Elvis, and no one thought it was funny. I actually had several people email me who thought that my Elvis joke last week was really underappreciated, which I was very grateful that someone actually noticed. And then Jesus turns and he makes it personal. He says, who do you say that I am? The thing I love the scriptures. As the scriptures have become less principle-oriented and soundbitey to me, like a lot of us read like sound, let's get a sound bite, let's get a tweet, let's get a nugget so we can fire something out there, a principle we can apply. And you start to enter into what is happening. And you start to sense and feel sort of Jesus' invitation to sit and to meet him in this place. It's opened my eyes in ways that I can't even begin to express. I have just a renewed passion and a renewed, I don't know what the word is, just to enter into this. So this is what I've been doing with this passage, reading it over and over and over. And so try to imagine, who do you say that I am? I don't know if there was a moment of silence or some quiet as they all kind of milled. Who do I say that he is? He's a carpenter. I mean, who? And then Peter sort of breaks the silence, if you will. And in verse 16, he says this. We'll put this on the screen so you can see it. Simon Peter answered them and he says, you are the Messiah. You are the long-awaited one. You are the one whom the prophets have spoken of. You are this person, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. You are the Lord. That's what he said. You are Jesus the Christ, the Messiah. You are Lord, Son of the living God. This is a declaration, a confession of his supremacy, of his lordship, of his rule and his reign. That's how this would have been interpreted. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. I love what Jesus says to him. Simon, you didn't just think of this on your own. It wasn't logic. It wasn't proof. It wasn't evidence. What does he say? Flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, Simon, son of Jonah, but rather it was revealed to you by my Father who is in heaven. This demonstrates for us the way we come to him. When Jesus says, seek first the kingdom of God, when he says, seek and you'll find, ask and you'll be answered, knock and the door will be open, he's saying for us to come to him and to look and to pursue and to ask. And he reveals, he shows himself, he is faithful to do that. And he continually does this as we posture ourselves to learn and to listen and to pursue him. And so he says, this was revealed to you by my Father who is in heaven. And then here's Jesus continues. And I tell you that you are Petros, you are the rock. And on this rock, I will build my church. And the gates of Hades shall not overcome it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. This is the picture that he gives him. Now, that's a cool soundbite. The gates of hell shall not prevail against the church. I'm not using Hades just to keep me from saying hell. It's actually the word that was used in there. So when I read this, I begin to ask some questions. I begin to ask some questions about some things. There's a foundation, there's a promise. The foundation is that on this rock, on this foundation, God's church, the church of Jesus Christ, will be built. I believe that foundation is the confession that Jesus is Lord. It is built, this movement is built on those who have been reconciled to the Father. Those of us who live rightly related to God, those of us who are his people, his family. That's who we are, and we build that on this allegiance to his lordship. That's the foundation. The promise is that the gates of hell will not overcome it. And we go, yes, that's awesome. What does it even mean? Like, how are the gates of hell going to overcome or overpower this movement? You ever thought about this? Like, whenever you ever walk by a fence and go, oh, I hope that thing doesn't jump on me. Because gates just stay there. They don't do anything. And when you get a picture, when you get this image in your mind of these gates of hell, it's actually really interesting that Jesus was in Caesarea Philippi. It mentions that in that text, if you look right above it. He was in Caesarea Philippi. In Caesarea Philippi in the first century, there was a cave that had some gates that a lot of the ancient world believed this was the gates of Hades. This is a physical place. This is the entrance to the underworld. I don't frankly think Jesus was talking about those gates. I think he was probably taking something that people were familiar with and then using it to mean something else. So when you think about the gates of hell not prevailing, what image comes to your mind? Now, if you grew up like I did, you have a really stark image in your mind because you had people threaten you with that. If you don't turn, you'll turn or what? Burn. So these gates, so I can get the cave. There's a cave, there's some gates. What's behind the gate? What's behind the gates? The gates of Hades. There's these gates. What's behind it? What does it look like? Probably like orange and red and yellow, fire, smoke. Is this the image you have? It's the image I've always had. I'm thinking, why does Jesus want to go in there? Like, what is that? Now, there's scholars that believe this is the illusion or a foreshadowing of him, 3 days to ascending into hell and taking back those keys and reascending to heaven. And I think that's part of it, but I think there's more. If you start to think about this, what I began to kind of ask and say, God, help me understand this. There is a rule and a reign. Like when Jesus talked, the word Hades is literally the realm of the dead. It's like in our modern context, it'd be like the Walking Dead, the zombie apocalypse, all those things. It's this place where people, if you've seen Pirates of the Caribbean, which I've been binge watching lately, I've never seen it before. It's fantastic. It's like Davy Jones, like that's the realm of the dead. And so perhaps if Jesus comes and he knows that he's entering into this world and he's bringing the life we were intended for, do you think that it would be reasonable for him to recognize this place where we are all held captive as being a realm of the dead? Do you think that he could look at us and say, the fear and the pride that you are trapped in, that you are held by, that you need release from? This is actually what Jesus said, I have come to release the prisoners. From what prison? Could it be the realm of the dead? Could it be the prison of the hell that we experience in our souls when we sort of try to manufacture and the things that we do to ourselves and to one another in the process of pursuing this thing that we can never seem to find? All of a sudden you begin to sort of mine on this and you say, Jesus may be talking about something really differently. If the system remains separated from God, that is where everything is held captive that he intends to redeem. It is ungoverned, or it is not governed by the rule of love, and it's held captive. Then perhaps there's something else at stake. The world system operates outside of God's life and love, I think could be a picture of this place where we are trapped and held that he has come to get. So then what he says is this, or this is how I began to think about this, that this idea that the gates of hell overpower really doesn't mean like they do something, but that they resist. The gates of hell, of Hades, cannot resist this force coming into them. What's the force that God comes to us with? It's his love. So then my sort of biblical math, my brain, I said, what if these gates of Hades mark places that are resistant to this love that we're desperate for? What if these gates are places that are resistant, that withstand or resist God's love for us and keep us imprisoned? You know that's our story. There are places where we are resistant, where we just feel like we're unworthy, or there's so much shame, or there's whatever it is that keeps us resistant to God's love. What if these are the gates that Jesus is talking about? Then this is what made me like go, oh my gosh, I've never seen this before. So I walked into my office and I had this up on my computer screen, and I had Matthew 16:18 up there, and it looked like this. I'll put it up on the screen. And it says this, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not overcome it, and I will give you the keys to the kingdom. And they were both like highlighted and bolded. And the two things that jumped out at me were gates and keys. And I began to ask myself, what do keys do? What do they do? They open things. They open things. Why would Jesus tell us, hey, I'm going to build this movement. I'm going to source it. And everything that resists my love in this world. Everything that holds people trapped in fear and shame and pride will not be able to withstand this movement. And then what does he say next? So I'm giving you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Now, Matthew uses the kingdom of heaven synonymously with the kingdom of God. There are reasons we don't have time to get into. But I think we all can agree that the keys that he is talking about are not literal keys to the pearly gates. So at the end of our lives, we have to ask Peter, we give him our ticket, and he opens these gates and lets us in. We know that's not what he's talking about. I assume we know that. So what if the keys to the kingdom were given to us to unlock the gates of Hades? What if he handed you the keys to make sure that you moved into this world to unlock and to set free and to do the kind of work that kept people from being trapped in these places that keep them apart, separated from life, which is literally death? What would that look like for you and for me? What kind of authority would that be like for you and for me? The keys open places that were once resistant, and they paved the way for us to receive. They paved the way for us to receive. Think about this. If you start to take seriously what God has actually entrusted to you, and you enter into someone and you unlock someone else's, you are the way in which you offer yourself to another person, that love is not resisted and they open up to you. You know what comes out when you unlock the gates of Hades? A mess. You walk into a mess. And this is exactly what Jesus modeled for us. This is exactly what he has invited us to live. And I began to think about this, that what happens to us and what we need to remember when we're called is this is not about overlaying our system that we figured out here over the world. It's about us moving into the world with redemptive activity, with keys that unlock and work to set people free, a person, a human being. And what you have to do is you have to get very, very close to someone. It's interesting, I was thinking about this, because in the world system, it's all built on generalities. And if you don't get general anesthesia, what kind of anesthesia do you get? What'd you say? Right. I thought you was like, what? I've never heard of that before. You get local. You get something that's proximate. You get something that's in front of you. You get something that you can reach. And if you're not impersonal, what's the opposite of that? Anybody recognize this? Over here, you'll stand on issues and you'll always use God's kingdom as a system to solve problems. If you learn this, you learn to walk with people. And you learn the redemptive force that the gospel has actually made available to you. It's to get local, it's to get personal, it's to listen, it's to understand, it's to enter into things with people. This is how God has called us to live. We are a formative community. You are being shaped and we are being shaped. What affects you affects me. What affects me affects you. It is us together. It is very complex. The more people you bring into the mix, you know that, right? Because people have all kinds of crazy opinions, and a lot of them are wrong. The keys that he's entrusted us with, right, move into places that are resistant to God's love. We pull out to say, Lord, let me bear your image, form me into your image so that I bring the influence of your love into the world around me. Let me pull out and get realigned and reoriented to your way and what you want, and let me enter back in to bring something better. This is the way in which we are called to live in this world. Remember, we've been kind of hammering this. 1 Peter 2, once you were not a people because you had not received mercy, but now you are a people. Why? Because you have received mercy. Right? The pattern of setting people free, the pattern of bringing the gospel and God's love to bear on the lives of other people requires something from us. It's not just a matter of turning a key. It's a matter of entering in and walking with to help them receive. We receive in such a way, we take hold of something in such a way that it takes over. That's the picture. That's what we're after. That's how we become a part of his people. This isn't some code that we're supposed to decipher to figure out how things are going to turn out, but rather it's our willingness, your willingness to walk in the authority that has been made available to you, to me. It's the rule of God's love revealed in the way of Jesus, and that was made flesh and entered the world. And that same exact principle is true the way you and I flesh out, bring flesh to God's love and enter into the world around us, to be personal and to be local. This is the way we as a formative community enter into our world for the redemption of everything that is held captive under the futility of the system of this world. And Jesus has handed you the keys. When my kids learned to drive, especially my oldest, when she learned to drive, I handed her the keys to my car, and I thought, dear God, right? This is the picture. We have been handed authority and responsibility and mission and vision. He's invited you and I to re-enter into this world to this afternoon and tomorrow to bring the integrity of his image of who God is and to bring the influence of his love. This is a beautiful invitation for us, and it is more available than you can imagine. It is easier to step into. A lot of us are going, I can't do that. Yes, you can. And the way you do it is by taking a step, a single step in a direction towards, together with us. And one of the things that we've done at Port City is we spent a tremendous amount of time trying to make this church, as large as it is, to be incredibly personal. We want to extend a hand to you to help you connect. We don't want you to just sign up for programs. We want you to connected, vitally connected to who we are. We want you to be a part of our church in meaningful ways that continue to contribute to the formative work in your life and also the work that he has for us. And so I want to close. I want to share with you a story of Scott. We call him, for a long time he was just known as Volunteer Scott, or Scott with a stash of snacks. Better clarify that. And his story is such a pointed picture of how one single step causes you or transforms or turns or causes you to become a part of something that you did not know was available. So let's take a look at Scott's story.
I came in here hoping someone could fix me. I just wanted God to heal me or someone in the building to tell me what I need to do to not hurt anymore. But what I discovered was community and relationships, and then just a growth of faith through serving. Found myself just in debilitating depression. Everything was just collapsing on me emotionally. I was away from the church for 25 years, but seeking some healing and some counseling, I ended up coming to the church here and meeting with Dennis. I came in thinking that I'm going to share my problem and then Dennis is going to fix it. He said, I just want you involved in the church. You know, what do you think about being an usher? And I thought, well, that doesn't sound good at all. But I was so desperate for healing, I said, okay, I'll do that. Became an usher, and I wasn't qualified to be in that room. All these people, as far as I knew, they weren't sinners like I was. And so I didn't feel comfortable being an usher because I didn't think I was worthy to be an usher. And I grew out of that because people poured into me. By being around other Christians, the guilt fell off, the hurt fell off. I went from coming here and just kind of pressing through it to wanting to be here. I mean, just waking up on Sunday and going, yes, today I get to go serve at church. I experienced healing and growth because I was participating. I was not a bystander, I was not a spectator. I had a role to play. I started out as zero confidence usher 6-7 years ago, and now I'm leading an usher team. I'm serving breakfast to the band on Sunday mornings. I come in here during the week and help set up and clean the green room. Serving at this church has taken my faith from borderline wondering whether or not there's even a God to walking with God every day, and that be the foundation of the reason I get up in the morning. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is my community. God has put me here for a reason, with a purpose, with a role to play. Yeah, this is where my people are. This is my home.